No, it's interesting that now the word eSports and gaming is going into the school systems. I mean, it's something definitely changing that a lot of us probably didn't see coming, or at least people from the outside. But let's start with the basics here. I'd like to understand the difference between when we start talking about home use, commercial use, enterprise servers, the needs around that. I'll start with Robert on that.
Yeah, I think the difference is usually when you think of something that you use at home versus something that's in commercial, primarily comes down to the amount of usage that the device gets. So if something is going to be online for 24/7, it's going to have those types of expectation. It's going to need to be more enterprise grade gear that's in it. If the use case is much more aligned with an everyday home computer use, even if you game on it for a few hours and you hit it pretty hard, that's still more of a desktop home user type scenario. So really amount of use and the amount of people using that device can kind of dictate whether or not it's considered home use or enterprise grade. And then I think workstations kind of are ideal for that middle ground between where you come into home use or commercial use.
So sometimes one of those loose terminologies too that people kind of abuse or throw around. What defines a workstation? In my opinion, it's like Robert said, that really mid-range to a higher end tier type of a desktop. But it's one of those terms that it's kind of a loose abused term in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there because in my prep for this conversation, I found a lot of references to workstations. And I found that in terms of like gaming workstations, I found that with business. And so I found that very confusing. So that definition helps. Thank you. I want to touch on something though. So, we just started off by chatting about the difference between home and commercial, enterprise, whatever. And I feel like we just kind of focused for a second there really on the hardware, but I'm wondering if, when a person or a business is looking at their needs, if there's other things outside of just hardware they should be looking at. And Robert, I'm hoping you can help provide some context for that.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to look at, with not making a mistake is to really look at the job of the machine or the applications that are going to be running on the machine to be able to determine what hardware is most appropriate. I think some people can fall into a trap of, they purchased what they purchased last time, or they read some article and they think that maybe they need this because of that. When, the most important thing to keep in mind is what job is it going to be doing? What applications are going to be running and how does it need to perform? And that will help you really center in on what kind of hardware you actually need.
Yeah, and I think even just budget matters a bunch too. If I have $500 to spend on a machine, what in thinking about what those needs are, what I need to accomplish, I can get a really great machine if I'm really just looking at kind of that low end computing side of things. But if I have, a lot of different multitasking needs, or I want to do high end gaming or something that's a little bit farther on the spectrum, I'm going to need to think about where my budget falls in line. At the end of the day, not all machines are created equal. And, that's because different jobs require different back end. And I think those are kind of other layers to that conversation when you look at kind of the software needs and the hardware needs.
So secondary question, because I'm very curious. I've always had the kind of belief that if you spent $2,000 on a computer, that was going to be a better computer than a computer that was $1,500 or $1,000 or whatever. Is that objectively true?
Yeah, I mean, it again comes back to like, what are your needs? What are you trying to accomplish? At some point, there's going to be a diminishing return. If I get this souped up $5,000 computer and all I'm doing is Microsoft Word, that's overkill. So it again comes back to, if I look at what I'm trying to accomplish and then try and pair the machine that's best built for that job, your experience as a user overall is going to be better.
Gotcha.
So I feel like in the old days that me personally, and I'm a nerd. I mean, I'm not as nerdy as Cam is a nerd, but I'm pretty nerdy with my tech. I would buy probably the cheapest computer that kind of fit my situation, and then I would just say to myself that I'll replace that in a year and a half, or 2 years. But now I feel like my needs are getting much greater. Like we're on Zoom meetings all day long. I'm doing a lot more multitasking than I did before. I've got 3 monitors going now, and I'm investing a lot in the hardware side, right? So how do I support this? I mean, now this isn't like something I'm going to replace every year or 2 years. I'm probably going to keep it longer. I might want to add to it. I mean, how do I support this from a hardware standpoint? And I assume that ByteSpeed can add some value to that also. So I'd like to understand a little bit what that is.
Support can become a huge issue or a big concern for a lot of customers. And it really depends on, again, is this home use, more business, K-12, hospital, financial, what is the use case here? If you're a school, you need to have that support behind you. You need to gain trust with the company you're buying the hardware from. And that's really where ByteSpeed shines, and that's what we take pride in is being able to support our customers with top tier support. If you need to call in, you have an issue, we're going to answer the phones right away, and somebody's going to be there to help you. And that's huge. And that's all about building trust. Once you can trust the company you're buying your hardware from, it's a game changer. You don't want to be stuck with all this hardware and you're having issues with it. Nobody's there to help you.
And I think, speaking from the perspective of somebody who was a ByteSpeed customer before coming to work here, that trust and reliability was like a huge determining factor of why we decided to choose ByteSpeed as a vendor. You think about the long-term cost of ownership on a machine, and a year or 2 from now, what's the cost? What's the opportunity cost of that machine going down? Do I call somebody and sit on the phone for 3 hours before I actually get an answer? Or, can I call Kevin direct and get help or somebody on a help desk? From my world, when we had, our eSports team at the university I worked at, if a machine went down, that meant a student couldn't practice. We didn't have as many, computers available for competition. So it was a huge part of our day-to-day was making sure that all of our tech was up and running and having that peace of mind, knowing that our vendor was there to actually support us was a huge determining factor.
Absolutely.
It's not so easy. Sounds like it's nuanced, kind of like a lot of things. I like it. I want to switch gears a little bit. I think needs is a very important conversation, and I hope that there's additional context for people. But I want to chat, because I am a big nerd, and I want to chat about the nerdy stuff right now, if that's okay. Intel did sponsor this event. It only makes sense that we would talk about Intel's latest stuff. So, nerds like me attending and nerds like me watching this are going to acknowledge that, like, in recent months, last little while, AMD's really upped their game with their processors. And so we're seeing Intel respond to that, right? And as a result of that, we just got the latest 10th generation chipsets. They were just dropped. And I kind of feel like back in the day, because I am a big nerd, I'd buy a Pentium 2 400, and that was objectively faster than the Pentium 2 350. But I kind of feel like with all the I's, it's just like the i3 and 7 and 9 and 5, like it's just getting a little muddied because this nomenclature has existed for a while now with Intel. So they just dropped new chips. I'm in the market for a new machine. What I do I buy? Can somebody walk me through this?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to quickly touch on the AMD piece, Intel has responded. They responded with 8th Gen in a big way. And the biggest way they responded with 10th Gen now is probably adding hyper-threading to all their core chips, which really adds the ability to multitask. No longer are you bottlenecked with the i3 versus the i5, i7. They all have hyper-threading, so you're getting that great benefit that you once had to pay a premium for, and that's a big thing. Going back to what do you actually need, it goes to use case. Is this let's just take K-12 for example. Is this going into elementary, middle school, high school? Elementary is not going to need an i7. It's not going to need top tier spec. They're probably just going to be doing simple web browsing tasks usually. So you can even look at doing like a Pentium, start with Pentium line, maybe the i3. Once it gets to more middle school range, maybe bump up to the i5, more memory, things like that, and so on. High school, could be i7, depending on what they're doing. i9 is usually just that top tier. Nobody really needs it, but if you have the budget for it, great. It's kind of like that flex thing, that we talked about. It's there. It's a very cool chip. It's a good chip, but in reality, not many people actually need it, unless you're actually, maybe a business. If you were a business and you were looking to save time to export projects, things like that, there is a need for some of those use cases. But it really goes back to use cases and budget, and what are these machines going to be used for?
So is it fair to say then that your i3 is probably the ideal chip for home use and for like light usage? So you mentioned like the elementary school as an example, and I like that. Back when I was in elementary, I was playing Roller Coaster Tycoon on the library's, Pentium 2 266, and it ran okay. And I probably could do fun on an i3 is what I'm hearing, right? But like, when we look at practical applications for some of these processors, like I'm going to buy an i9. I'm a big geek. Chris identified that. I own that. That's fair. And quite frankly, I want that for a long time. So i9, buy it once, I'm good. I know that for me. Also, my wife is strangely supportive of this addiction. So that's why I'm going to get away with it, right? What is that differentiator between, okay, so this is i5 territory, this is i7 territory? Like, what is there a specific differentiator there, or is it really just kind of a generalized thing?
It's going to come back to budget, and also the biggest thing is just a business or home use. Home use, I think we touched on i3. Let's stay in that realm, unless you have a kid that wants to game or something like that. If you're a business, though, you should really start with the i5 and move up from there, because when it comes to a business, time is money, right? So anytime your employee, needs to be or slowed down by technology, that's a huge loss for your company. So you really want to step up to at least that i5 mark, in my opinion, and then really go up from there. What is this end user doing? Are they going to be doing more advanced tasks, multitasking, and what's going on there? Again, even with the gaming side, the whole platform is going to game. It's just going to be, what are you going to be playing? Esports, high-end games and that sort of thing. So I mean, does that make sense, guys?
What I just heard is an i3 will play Minecraft, but it won't play Minecraft RTX. Is that fair?
I think so.
So i3 is...
I'll tell you something, though. I am really confused. So you're talking i3, i5, i7. You're saying cores. I'm reading about cores and clocks. Like what the hell does all this really mean? I mean, why do I want 3 cores versus 10 cores?
Well, the biggest thing with cores to consider is multitasking. So it's going to allow you to have more applications open at one time. You said you have all things going. You got Zoom, you got Teams, you got 18 tabs open. An i5 right there, you really want to start probably in that realm. You're doing a lot of things. It's going to handle all that workload you're going to throw at it. But when it comes down to it, cores it's still important, but everything is just loaded to the max really with cores, even clock rates. Clock rates used to be a big topic, and it still is important, but Intel's really stepped their game up. All these chips have good frequencies. They all have good core counts. So it's really just... it's never been a better time to buy a PC than now, really, as far as what Intel's offering.
I want to, so we just got an interesting question, and so I just want to touch on that. And I'm going to read it verbatim, and then, maybe Kevin or Robert, I think this is probably more in your wheelhouse versus the esports side. So we've touched on business requirements analysis, lifecycle management. I think that's important. The question is, how do you ByteSpeed, how do you engage your customers prior to that decision-making process, right? So are you involved from kind of day one on the architectural side, determining capability, process modeling, application rationalization, and defining business requirements prior to getting into the tech that you're going to offer? So this is a particular area of focus for this individual. So I'm very curious to see if we can give this person like a good answer.
I have a perfect example. Salesman calls me this morning. Hey, I got this customer on the phone. Hey, I want you to talk to him. He's got this use case. Please point him in the right direction. Let's start and give him a quote and let's start there. And that's really the personal experience you're going to get working with a company like ByteSpeed. It's not going to be just this web thing you'll fill out. You'll get an email. Oh, here's your quote. You're going to be able to talk to somebody, and we're going to be able to work work with you to figure out what is the best machine for you. So it's going to be catered to exactly your needs and fit your budget, your needs, hopefully to a T, and you're going to have that great service and support behind all that. And I'm sure Robert has very similar examples as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest part, right? I think that's the value add, that when you look for a reseller, you want a value added reseller. You want a VAR, because then you can call and you can say, this is what we're looking at doing. This is what we need to accomplish. We'd really like to budget this out to make it last us 5 years. And then you can kind of have that back and forth discussion with real people and get to that point where you have the perfect solution for you. And that's why we're a custom shop, that you don't just have one or two different options that you can pick off a shelf. It's really good to have those discussions up front, and then make sure that you understand the quote once you do get it, and you're comparing apples to apples with your other quotes, and you're really getting what you pay for and getting into something that's the best value for you, total cost of ownership. Okay,
you said something and it triggered me a little, because I've been having this conversation right now. So I've made it very clear I'm buying a new machine, and I was going to do it January, February, but then this whole pandemic situation went down, and I thought maybe I'd chill out. So I chilled out for a bit, and things look like they're kind of going to be okay. So I'm back in the hot seat and I'm ready to buy. So I've spec'd out this machine, and I shared it with a buddy of mine, and he told me that I don't need a new Y, that my existing i7 6700K is going to be more than sufficient. And then when I went to dig into like what separates the new eyes from the old eyes, I really wasn't able to answer that question. And I was wondering if you might have some perspective for me. And this is legit a personal question, because I need to know, because I've got a credit card and I just want to make it hot. All right.
Take my money.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the actual lines, right, are pretty muddy, because you're getting so much value. And perfect example is you maybe needed or used to need that i7, where now really that i5 is going to perform at the i7 range, but it's also going to be much less as far as cost goes. So as far as that goes, it looks much different. I mean, you can get an i3 now that's going to perform at an i5, a few years back. So you no longer need to be throwing all this money at maybe the CPU. You could maybe throw it at more memory, a better graphics card, storage, something like that. And I mean, really everything is just, core count, we talked about that earlier, is just extreme. 8th gen came out, they finally introduced 6 cores, which really had never happened on their, consumer standard CPUs. And now that's just the norm. Now we're seeing 8, 10 cores with this new lineup, which is crazy. And they all have high clock rates, hyper threading, and it's pretty crazy to see that kind of performance and the value that you're getting with these new chips.
So I'm hearing a lot of like what I should be doing, what we need to be doing, and I'm kind of wondering like where can I really screw up? Where can I make a mistake here? If I'm a business, let's talk on the business side, right? What is a typical business need as a workstation, and where are you seeing people make tons of mistakes?
Yeah, so business for me is don't buy an underperforming machine. That would be my biggest takeaway. I think as a business, your budget's usually a little bit more flexible. You're not locked into this particular, here's your budget to work with for this physical year. You hopefully have a little bit more flexibility. And if you shell out a little bit more money for the i5, the i7, it's going to pay back, because your employees are going to be able to do their work faster, do their work better. Boot times, application load, all these things come into play when you're talking business. Again, time is money, and you don't want to be waiting on technology.
We have another question. We actually have 4 of them back to back. So we're going to do a quick lightning round. Kevin, do you want to be lightning round contestant today, or Robert, are you feeling it? Or maybe Josh, maybe you want to have an opportunity to talk.
I think whoever. I think we'll just jump in.
Deal. Okay. So a few questions. Let's start with this. So thinking education, K through 12, what's the expected lifespan of a computer in that environment? And the caveat here, some context. Should you run those computers into the ground to get like maximum value, to get your money's worth? Or is it more sensical to replace these things at like predetermined and regular intervals?
I think it can depend on the school budget, obviously. As a former tech director, my budget, what I did was I took the number of computers I needed to have in labs and divided that by 5, obviously, and I had a 5-year replacement plan. So I knew that in my model, I would never have more than a 5-year-old machine. And that worked well for us because all of our desktops at ByteSpeed have a 5-year warranty. So I used ByteSpeed, and that lined up with my plan. So that replacement cycle and warranty is a consideration there. I think another thing with K-12 that it makes it that you should look at in Lifecycle is making multifunctional decisions. So labs are starting to go away. You have less labs. So those labs need to be more multifunctional. You need to be able to have maybe your VR lab, and then you remove the VR piece and it's a CAD lab. And then at night, your eSports team can come in and play on those machines. So I think making use of multifunctionality and having that long-term replacement plan is really important with Lifecycle and looking at what to purchase.
So I just want to interject with an anecdote. I was born at the wrong time. I was born in '86. And when I was in middle school, playing games on the computers was a no bueno thing. You only did that when the administrator wasn't watching. And now you just talked about the esports team coming playing games on the school's dime. What a time to be alive. All right. The next question here. Do you buy something that's crazy overkill? So like, I'm going to do that. We all know I'm buying an i9. I've made that very clear. But is that something everybody should do? Do you go overkill, or do you get something that is just, sufficient for your needs as they are today? The real question here, if you go crazy hardcore overkill and everybody buys i9s, is that like a future-proofed decision?
I would say to some degree it is, yes, but in reality, I think all these chips are pretty future-proof the way they sit. So it's going to go back to, are you just buying this i9 that's going to sit there and not really be used? Is that a good decision? No. So it's going to go back to budget, use case, maybe, put some extra memory in the thing, or put a better card, a video card in there. That would be my advice as to where you should be putting your money. But now again, there is a use for the i9. If you're a business and you need to be cranking out some crazy exports from some high-end CAD project or something like that, that i9 is going to pay for itself. So there's a example of where you might want an i9, but I wouldn't overspend on the CPU side. The i5, i7, even the i3 is really going to last several years. We have SSDs now. PC performance has never been as good as it is right now.
PC performance, correct. All right. What about just throwing some shade? What about laptops versus desktops? And I'm thinking this might be for again, education application.
So laptops is a little different. Laptop chips aren't necessarily created equal. The i3, i5, i7, they do have i9s as well, Xeons, things like that. Mobile, I would, if the budget's there, I would definitely pay a little bit more. If you can afford it, you're gonna get better clock rates, usually more cores depending on the chip. Intel's at a pretty rapid cadence though with their mobile chips, so it's tough to keep up. I mean, if you look at Intel Mobile right now, you have anything all the way from 8th all the way up to probably 11th gen almost. So I mean, within the next little bit here, so it's going to be pretty muddy water from the mobile standpoint. And some are 14 nanometer, some are 10 nanometer, and they're not all created equal. Really, if you're looking to future-proof yourself, in most regard, I would try to land for the i5. If the budget's there for the i7, maybe go for that.
Is it fair to say that unless you need the mobility of the laptop, that it's generally a better decision for businesses, for schools, et cetera, to purchase a desktop?
Hands down. You're going to get better warranty, better serviceability on the product. If something goes bad, you can probably replace it. Mobile, it's kind of up in the air. More and more manufacturers are really locking these devices down where you can't even take them apart, right? So desktop, always better bang for your buck, better performance, better warranty. Usually.
Gotcha. All right, and then the final question, which gen of Intel processors offer the best value, and does it make sense to move from one generation to the next? I think the question really is if I've got a Gen 4 or a Gen 5, does it make sense that I go and grab a Gen 6 or Gen 7? If I've got a Gen 8, should I be really interested in the Gen 10s that just came out? What's that look like?
Yeah, for sure. If you're actually back in Gen 4, Gen 5, sorry, excuse me 1 second. If you're actually back on Gen 5 or Gen 4, there's definitely a huge, significant bump as soon as you really get to 8th gen. And if you're really already looking at 8th gen, you should just go fully up to 10th gen. You're going to get added benefits. Clocks, hyper-threading are going to be the biggest, and you're not going to be spending really any more money. So if you're already looking at 8th gen, just jump right to 10th gen. And that's really my best advice. The older CPUs, there's been a lot that's changed as far as speeds, core counts, and all that stuff.
And I think the added benefit of all the new i-series having hyper-threading, I mean, that in itself, if you go from i5 to i5, 10th gen, you're automatically getting double the cores from
bump,
yeah. Right,
yeah. So Robert, could you maybe explain like what hyper-threading is? I don't think we've actually talked about that on this call, but it's been kind of a focus of a lot of the answers. And it seems like it's almost like Intel's like silver bullet in a way. So I'm just curious if you could walk me through that.
Yeah, so hyper-threading, the analogy that I usually use with people, locally when I'm teaching people about computers and what hyper-threading does is I use the analogy of a person. And if you think of the CPU doing all the work and the person's doing all the work, just imagine that a person can do work, can sign documents, can process paperwork with each hand at the exact same speed. So if something has hyper-threading, it can do double the work. So a quad core processor has 4 physical cores, but if it has hyper-threading, then it will do the work of 8 cores. So it doubles the amount of processors that you have effectively.
So how does cloud computing play into this? I mean, when we talk about kind of use cases, we're talking about hyper-threading and all of that, but with the influx of cloud computing and I would say more hybrid computing, how does that impact the hardware requirements?
It's going to be a big question as to, where is this compute actually happening? Is this at a local level or actually in the cloud? I think, for the most part, everything we're doing right now is in the cloud pretty much, but we still need a lot of local resources to be able to stream this video at a good quality. So that's the big question is where is the compute happening? More and more things are moving to the cloud, and I think everybody's working from the cloud in some way, shape, or form in this current era that we're in, especially with everything that's been going on. But for sure, everybody's using some sort of cloud storage, but usually that's just for data. So you're still likely need that local compute power to actually process what those files need to do.
Yeah, like Kevin said, I mean, even though you're offloading your data storage to the cloud, and people are still, running multiple applications, and a lot of those apps can eat up processing power and take up memory. And so you're needing to run Zoom or Teams, and you're needing to also, multitask and show a presentation and do all these things. And all those things take up local compute and memory resources. So
what I just heard was don't underbuy, right? Don't assume that everything is Google Stadia-fying life when in reality, you're probably working more locally than you think. And for the people who don't know what Google Stadia is, that's how you can tell I'm the geek on the call. All right, so then I guess the logical question is, given that a lot of us, certainly everybody watching this and most people I think today, as we called out, are working in the cloud. So when we look at cloud work, what's the hardware that you are going to want locally that's going to support that, right? Knowing that there's still demands on your machine. So what do I need if I'm in the cloud all day?
Yeah, I think
go ahead,
Kevin.
I think it goes back to our kind of original, statement that the cadence that we've been going is, what are you doing? So Office 365, for example, that's just Word, maybe Excel. If you're just doing that, the i3 is going to be fine, but it's going to go back to what are you doing in the cloud and what's being processed in the cloud versus on your desktop. So it's not really cut and dry, unfortunately, because more and more applications are being virtualized, but that still doesn't mean you don't need that horsepower locally.
Yeah, and I think with the migration to the cloud, you also have your local cloud. You have your virtual storage in locally, and for those things, you need to make sure that you're reliable, right? Because now you've got all your multiple eggs in one basket. And so for us, we use Intel hard drives, Intel motherboards, Intel processors. And one of the biggest reasons we use those high quality and specifically Intel stuff is, it has such a high reliability rate that we have a very low failure rate across the board, even compared to their, other high market competitors with CPUs and power supplies. It's very dependable and reliable, and you need that as you develop your internal cloud infrastructure.
So you talk about low failure rate, and the first thing I think of is like total cost of ownership now. Like what am I paying up front and over the life of the time of owning this piece of equipment? My guess is there's a big piece into this that we haven't talked about, which is licensing. So how does that play into it? I think this is a question for Robert, because we're getting into the server world here, and I know that people are not going to, or I should say these manufacturers are not going to leave money on the table when it comes to licensing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the biggest questions when we get questions on quotes at times is this licensing right? And the migration to virtualized environments, to cloud environments, has had a huge influence on licensing from major companies like Microsoft and backup companies like Veeam. As people migrate to these virtual environments, cloud environments, the licensing becomes per physical CPU. So the amount of CPUs that you have inside of a device is going to affect your licensing. So in the old days, you might have, if it was only a few dollars here or there to get 10 core processors as opposed to 2 8-core processors, you might have just done that just to have the extra horsepower. But nowadays, that really can cost you in the long run if those aren't necessary to your environment. It can just be more licensing fees that you're having to pay for those additional cores that you're really not getting as much use out of. So avoid that as kind of a gotcha. When you're doing server builds, don't just buy the cheapest value or most valuable processor. Look at what you really need to avoid future licensing costs.
That shocks me, if I'm honest with you. Only because I didn't know, it wouldn't have occurred to me, but I also spent my whole life buying Windows personal licenses. So, that tells you something too, right? Are we cool if I shift gears again? Because I think that I actually have an open invitation here to totally geek out for the next 13 minutes. And I kind of want to do that. So are we cool to start geeking out a little?
Yeah.
Josh, it's your time to shine.
Yeah.
So Josh is the resident eSports gaming geek, just like me on the call. And so it's fitting that we're going to end on this kind of what I think is a really fun note. I want to start with this. Esports has become really big recently. We're talking 6-figure, sometimes 7-figure prize pools at some of these events, hundreds of thousands of attendees and stadiums. Like I used to be like, oh, this is totally gimmicky. And now I'm like, yeah, this is a thing, right? But esports is not the same as gaming, right? Like, and it's not the same as streaming gaming. And I'm curious, Josh, if you could educate me and everybody else on what that actually means.
Yeah, I think one of the big misconceptions about esports is that we're just, sitting and playing games, but there is a difference between what, colloquially we call esports, competitive, multiplayer, highly optimized games versus, your super large single player, highly immersive, in-depth single player experiences. So, it's two sides of the same coin. You're still playing a game, but the requirements on the hardware are vastly different because, when you talk about esports, a lot of the times they're really optimized for, lower end tech, and I'll say that in quotations, because you still do need, a good PC to run, the esports titles out there. But when you take a game like CSGO that's been around for 10 years, or League of Legends, it's been, a 10-year-old game, they haven't changed all that much over the last, 3, 4, 5 years. There's a joke among the esports world that you can play League of Legends on a toaster. But when you talk about kind of that high-end gaming experience, like, your Assassin's Creed Odyssey or some of these like giant open world games that have come out in the last couple of years, the computing needs are drastically more, it's more intensive to be able to run those really high-end experiences. And then you talk about streaming, you add another element on top of that. It kind of goes back to that, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you running a ton of things in the background? Are you multitasking? If you're streaming out your gameplay, it's just another thing that your computer has to deal with. So making sure that you pair your CPU with a good GPU and the supporting hardware, that'll really make a difference when it comes to esports or just gaming.
So CSGO will run just fine on an i3. Skyrim, you're going to need an i9, yeah?
Yeah.
Just kidding. Cyberpunk 2077, you're probably going to want an i5.
Yeah,
yeah. Something like that.
Well, and it's, as new generations of games come out, I mean, that kind of high-end side of things just keeps pushing the envelope, every single year. So, you're going to see higher in-depth, visuals, the ray tracing and all those other crazy things that are coming out. You're going to need a stronger processor to kind of keep up with that.
All right, we're going to get back to this gaming conversation, but I just got a very technical question that came through, and I think it'd be great if we could answer that now. I don't know who this is going to go to. I'm just going to throw that out there and let one of you catch it. Here it is verbatim. I'm curious about VDI and more centralized computing. Are we seeing businesses and education customers building out larger compute pools to support VDI, HPC needs, etc.? And the example, I recently completed projects to design solutions for both the examples I just quoted, large global VDI leveraging both Citrix and VMware, along with large HPC cluster for an insurance actuarial team.
All right. So I'll take part of that, and then Kevin can probably add into what I say. But so VDI can be very good and a very powerful thing. It gives you a unified management solution that you can manage a bunch of devices from one place, right? So that's the beauty of VDI. In education, I see VDI being used primarily toward something like an Amazon Web Services, where AppStream 2.0 can give you the capability to run CAD on a Chromebook, on a one-to-one device, no matter what that one-to-one device is at a student home. So in a limited scenario like that, I think the ability to give students remote access, especially now with what's going on involved, is a very powerful thing. But I think VDI in education, at least, is probably better left to something like Amazon Web Services, as opposed to trying to develop your own internal VDI if that's your only purpose. I think if you have a large virtual environment already that you can strap on VDI as an add-on component, that's a way to go. But from the ground up, if you're just looking at VDI over desktops, it's going to be way more expensive. Yes, Cameron. You're muted, Cameron. I couldn't.
What's VDI?
Virtual desktop infrastructure. So basically the ability to take a thin client of some sort, like a Chromebook even, and run a full-on desktop application on it, just like you were running it on a very powerful computer, because you're utilizing web or cloud resources as opposed to local resources.
All right. Anybody else want to, Kevin, you want to add to that answer?
I would agree with everything. I think that the biggest thing we're seeing, and it's already happening, is everything, you used to have to, build up your beefy server locally, but a lot of that stuff's starting to migrate towards the cloud almost exclusively. So instead of having your VDI network, if you will, locally, all that's either in Azure or Amazon Web Services now. And it's not, there's a pretty hefty cost to it. In short, you got to buy the hardware, plus you're likely paying for some licensing, and then if it is in the cloud, there's the compute resources that you're paying for as well. So it's not always that cut and dry. It's kind of can be a little bit messy.
Yeah, the video cards alone are very expensive, and then you have to pay a licensing fee for the video card to use it every year. And then you have to pay, usually depending on the type of thin client you get, you have to pay a licensing fee to be able to upgrade the thin client as well. So there are many, many costs associated with that beautiful unified management capability.
And back to games. So I mean, I'm a major geek, and that series of questions was like way over me. Let's I'm gonna lob a softball at you, Josh, because I need a little I need some room here. Lightning round, okay? Just you and me, bud. All right. Best Intel processor choice for esports.
If you're on a really tight budget, i3. If you've got kind of a little bit more cash, i5 is going to be perfect for you.
And what if I intend to stream those games?
You're going to want to do more of the i7 realm.
And what if I want to play Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K resolution?
You go get that i9 and enjoy it.
Yes. Can't wait. I'm going to see this whole thing's recorded. I'm going to send that clip to my wife and say, this is why you have a potato. All right. So let's get back to this. Let's talk. I want to just kind of put this to bed here. When we look at what influences gaming esports performance the most from a processor point of view, is it cores? Is it clock? Is it cache? Is it socket? What is it that I need to be looking at as my measure of performance?
Sure. And it kind of, one thing to keep in mind again is that the esports titles, and we're talking a very like small segment of the gaming space, they're super well optimized. So really, if you're looking at, where you're a school or a college or somebody that's trying to get into esports, if you just kind of look at the I part of this whole conversation, you're going to be pretty safe because all of those chipsets still are, like Kevin mentioned, they're all really, powerful and they have the support behind them to run the esports titles. And then as long as you pair it with a good GPU and have enough RAM and kind of make sure that your peripheral tech is where it should be, if you just kind of hone in on that i3, 5, 7, 9 conversation, you should be definitely more than fine.
So it really just comes down to make sure you just look at the I that matters most to you and go ahead and feel good about the I you buy.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
All right. I just felt like alliterating. I'm not going to lie. Although there is a question that came to my mind when you were talking about this. It's actually related to a question that one of the attendees asked us earlier, which is, what's the life cycle for these machines look like? Is this a thing where you go crazy hardcore up front and then you roll with that for years? Or like, what's the best way to look at that, Josh?
Sure. Especially when it comes to esports, again, because the games are so well optimized and we're really, utilizing the whole machine instead of just a processor, as long as you're going with good quality hardware, that build is going to be relevant 3, 4, 5 years down the road. I'm playing at home on a 4-year-old machine and it's still playing the relevant esports titles that are out today. So, you can feel good as long as you're going with a good, solid quality build and you get tech that is, relevant now. It's going to live for a few years and you're not going to have to worry about replacing the whole machine. When you get down into that 4 or 5 years from now, you might want to, add more RAM or update your GPU or whatever, that kind of auxiliary tech that you might have. That might be a better place to look at. But the processors are going to be relevant and the whole machine is going to definitely have a pretty long life cycle in the span of like esports and gaming.
So it sounds like if I want to get into this gaming thing, that I need a quiver of computers. I need my practice computer. I need my travel computer. I need my game day computer. I see where you guys are going with this, but that's all we had today. I wanted to make sure we wrap this up in time. Good thing we got those questions answered throughout this call. I really appreciate Intel for sponsoring today's conversation. Thank you, ByteSpeed, and everyone at ByteSpeed that participated in this, specifically Robert, Josh, and Kevin. Obviously, always good to catch up. So with that, we will end it today, and appreciate everyone's time, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.